Namaskar. Welcome to this new session. We have commenced on getting necessarily initiated in pranayamic aspects, the pranayam aspect of Ashtanga Yoga. Now, we all know that the pranayam is done with the breath. The breath is a major vehicle, major tool, instrument for pranayam. The breathing is major instrument for pranayam. That's a major vehicle. Now, when it is breathing in yoga, there are three aspects of breath and breathing. The in breath, the out breath, and retentive breath. Retentive phase is also aspect of breath and breathing. The retentions are of three types: outer retention and inner retention, that is retention after in breath and retention after out breath. So these are four movements to be considered in breathing insofar as pranayam is concerned. So in breath, out breath, retention, and retention is of two types: outer retention and inner retention. Therefore these are four aspects. Even in our breathly endeavors, we do use these four aspects in breathing. Of course, exhalation, inhalation goes on incessantly, but for some special endeavors, we also use the retentive phases. So, try to go for necessary kind of field work to understand where do we use and how do we use the outer retention, that is post-exhalative retentions. You want to take a long jump, you do that with post-exhalative retention. Many endeavors take place. You want to open out a tightly closed bottle. You will be using a post-exhalative retention, because when the power is required, motor power is required, we use the post-exhalative retentions. So somewhere try to have this survey carried out, when and how we use these post-exhalative retentions involuntarily, and we need to identify those. Then there is also post-inhalative phase of retention that we use. Most prominently we use it in waters. If you want to take a dip into waters, we take a deeper inhalation, so we equip our lungs with necessary in breath, and then close our nose and hold the breath, close the nostrils and hold the breath, and as long as we are able to hold the breath, we can submerge in the water, take a dip in the water. Once we cannot retain, we have to bring our heads up and then breathe above the waters. So the inhalative retention also comes, which has gone unnoticed. The exhalative retentions also come. So these are all part of breathing. You can't be retaining the inner retention without having inhaled. You can't be retaining external retention not having exhaled. So they are all parts of breath. So these are four aspects of breathing to be considered. In common man's language, when they say they want to check breathing, they just check whether there is inhalation, exhalation going on. In diagnosis, in pathologies, they want to see that the breath is going on, they will just see that the in-breath, out-breath is going on. The retention is not taken into consideration. However, even in our business life, activity of business of life, and even so many endeavors, we do use retentions. They give us a form of energy. So there is one kind of form of energy by inhalations, one kind of energy form by the exhalations, one kind of energy form by post exhalative retention, another kind of energy in post inhalative retentions. So we need to carry out a very formal study, a kind of examination, study, survey of how we use the breathing even in our life, which is not just in breath and out breath, but also the post inhalative, post exhalative retentions. So in pranayam, the breathing is considered to be of 4 facets. So this is a basic information that one needs to have, which is educative information. Pranayam means not just in breath and out breath. So it is really fascinating to understand what are the potentials of the breath and breathing. And again, I reiterate, when I say breath and breathing, the 4 aspects: in breath, out breath, outer retention, inner retention. Now, we all know this aspect of yoga as pranayam. But it would have been more appropriate to call this as shvasayam, because breathing is considered as shvasa. The breathing process is called as shvasa. And if you are doing something voluntarily in your shvasa, in your breath, it would be more appropriate to call it shvasayam. And there is no need to call it pranayam. But why Patanjali has used the word pranayam is again a matter to be investigated for our knowledge and comprehension. He could have used the word shvasayam, because in the first sutra on pranayam he speaks about shvasa prachvasa gati vichedaha, and then he says pranayam. So the point is, all pranayamas take place with breathing, either in breath, out breath, or post inhalative, post exhalative retentions. There is no any other kind of facet for pranayam that we might be attempting. We will do pranayam while exhaling, while inhaling, while externally retaining, or while internally retaining. These are only pranayamas that we can be attempting. But then he does not speak about shvasayam but pranayam, which implies the breath is merely a vehicle that is used. When we use the vehicle, we always have a destination in mind, and we go to a destination and you say, I am going to point B from point A. While we will be traveling in the vehicle, we don't say that it is I am just traveling in the vehicle, provided it is very unusual or very rarely taking place, a pleasure ride. Maybe in pleasure ride you will not have a destination and you will just have a pleasure ride. Then you say, I am just traveling in a vehicle, I want to just have a drive, experience a drive, pleasure of drive. You just go for a drive, you don't have destination in mind, you just go for a drive. But otherwise, when we get mounted onto a vehicle, we always have a destination in mind and how to go to that destination, in what time, in what route, in what path, in what way. And that's how we drive the vehicle. So the shvasa, the breathing, is merely a vehicle, and then it has certain schemes, a destination, a way to go about, the time duration aspects to go about. And that is why there is that aspect of regulation. And that regulation will be pranayam, provided we satisfy the conditions for such regulations. So basically, to get necessary basic education, we need to handle the breath. Now we all know pranayama is a breath regulation. Now if it is regulation, it implies that you must be knowing what that entity is, what is the purpose of entity, function of entity, how that can be used, any usages, any applications, any addressals. Now insofar as our respiratory breathing is concerned, its function is just to keep us living and keep our autonomous system functioning. That's all the function of our respiratory breathing and breath. But then pranayama implies regulation, a kind of regulation, or also it is called as breath control. Now why do you want to control? Basically, the breath is the most conscientious factor in our embodiment, which is working on its own. It doesn't need any motivation, it doesn't need any enticement. It just goes on doing its work. It's the most conscientious, active entity in us. Needless to say that our mind is not really so conscientious. Mind has its own tendencies, its own whims, its own crazes. So we can't say that our mind is a very conscientious entity. More often we come to know that the mind doesn't function when we want it to function in a particular way. It doesn't function in that way. More often it happens like that. When you want the mind to function, it doesn't function. When you don't want the mind to function, it functions. When you want the mind to work in a particular way, it doesn't work that particular way. It works in some other way, or more often in opposite way. You can't call your mind as conscientious entity, which is in activity. So is the case of your intelligence, so is the case of your emotions, so is the case of your memory, so is the case of your psyche, so is the case of your body. Only we can say that autonomous system is working very conscientiously. It doesn't have its whims. It doesn't have its choices and selections. It doesn't have its tantrums. Whereas the mind has its tantrums, mind aspects have the tantrums, emotion, mind, sentiment, memory, intelligence, intuition, creativity, imagination, they all have tantrums. We can't say they are activity agency is very conscientious. However, the breath is very, very, very conscientious. Whether you are conscious or unconscious, whether you are in senses, whether you are in comatose, the breath will keep on working conscientiously. And then, if something is working so conscientiously, why do you want to regulate it? So imagine if you have a servant in your house, he is very conscientious servant, but if you get behind that person every time for every single thing, that person, that servant will lose that fabric of conscience, and soon the person will be bereft of any conscience. The servant will wait for him to be told or for her to be told, and then only they will work. If you get behind very conscientious people, if you have someone working under you, very, very conscientious, you must give some liberty for the person. But if you get behind him with a whiplash and get the things done from a conscientious person, that fabric will be lost sooner or later, more often sooner than later. That fabric will be lost. We should never get behind a very conscientious person who works under us, who works for us. So this is the breath which is working so conscientiously. Where is the question of regulating it? Why should you regulate it? When it is working so conscientiously, whether you are conscious or unconscious, it works. Whether you are awake or asleep, it works. So, the connotation of regulation is totally different. Like you have a case of regulating mind. You know that the mind is naughty. How will you have a scheme to regulate your mind, which is so naughty, which is so unscrupulous, which has whims, which has strange ways to work? So when it comes to regulating the senses, regulating the mind, it is one connotation. Regulation has one connotation because none of them are so conscientious. None of them are selfless. Senses have selfishness, mind has selfishness, mind factors have selfishness. So because there is selfishness and because they have whims, they have moods, so the connotation regulate the mind is one connotation. Regulate the senses. It is similar such condition. It is similar connotation there. But regulate the breath is a totally different connotation. So this should be borne in mind. And try to have an inquiry as to what might be regulating the breath, which is so sincere, so faithful to you, so sincere to you, so conscientious. Have you ever seen the breath going for sick leave, casual leave, or any kind of leave? So nothing will be working as conscientiously as the breath. Nothing works as conscientiously for us as much as the breath works. So it's the most conscientious activity agency within us. What does it mean to say that it should be regulated? So, therefore, there must be an inquiry into this as to what is regulation when it comes to regulating the breath. Or it's also, pranayama is also called breath control. Now, the very connotation to the word control is unique, absolutely unique. When it comes to breath control, we need to have some inquiry into this as to what is the connotation here. Ayama, if it is regulation, ayama, if it is controlling, what is that control? So one of the mystic poets has beautifully described this. Now tell me whether between a parent and a child, between father and child, between mother and child, who really controls whom? How much are the parents under control of a child, and how much the child is in control of the parent? How the parents, when you say it is parental regulation, the parents are regulated by a child, which is the innocent child. The parents need to often yield to child. Provided it is totally untoward demand from the child, the parents will yield to an innocent child. Because innocent child cannot be a crafty child. It's the innocent child. Or another example which a poet gives is between a cow and a calf. The cow will go behind the calf rather than the calf going behind the cow. The cow will be following the calf to see that its safety is ensured. There is no case like in human beings. We can hold the hand of the child and walk on the streets. So we will hold the child by the finger or by the palm or by the hand, and then we will walk. A cow cannot do that to a calf. Most of the creatures cannot do that. They go behind their babies because they cannot be holding the hands of the babies or legs of the babies and mobilize the baby like in case of human beings. We will hold the child. It's only few animals like cat and kitten. Cat will hold the kitten in the mouth and will traverse. The monkey and the baby monkey. The baby monkey will clinch to the belly of the mother monkey, and then that's how it is mobilized. So, between cow and calf, the calf is regulator and the cow is regulated. So similar is the condition between the breath. When you say breath is breath regulation, it is such a condition. Anyway, so we need to examine this very term regulation, which comes in pranayama. It has a unique connotation. I repeat once again. You just can't go by lexicon as to what is the meaning of regulation, what is the meaning of word control, and apply that here. No. Basically, it's the most conscientious, sincere, most faithful, most activity agency within us, for us. No other our activity agency is so conscientious. Therefore, the whole culture of regulation is unique, which we need to understand at some point in time. Of course, we will not go to that right in the beginning because we have just commenced on it. But I am just hinting at you that we need to have a kind of education about the word regulation, the word ayama that comes. When it comes to regulation of anything, basically we must know what is the function of that. If A wants to regulate B, a person wants to regulate a person B, A must know what are the potentials of person B, what are the traits in person B, what is the qualification of person B, what is the caliber, qualification, capacity. And unless A has the knowledge of all that, he cannot be regulating. A should know the potentials of B, where person B is good, where person B is not good, where person B is bad. Wherever he is bad, he will not allow the B to do that. So, how to use the person B, what are the usages of person B has to be understood. What are the potentials, functions, acts of the function of the person B has to be identified. Similarly, it implies here that we must first know what are the functions of the breath in our embodiment. What functions can it carry out? What are its potentials to work on our body matters, body organs, body parts, body factors, body aspects? What are its potentials to work on mind, mind factors, mind facets, mind organs, and mind functions there? How far the breath can come in. So this kind of exploration is implied before one goes to pranayama, and this is the classical approach. In classical approach, we are first made to realize, we are first made to identify potentials of the breath and breathing within ourselves. We think only in-breath is something that comes in and out-breath that's something which goes out. But you will realize that in-breath can do so many things within us. Out-breath can do so many things within us. So we need to identify their functions. Extra respiratory functions, as I said in the last lesson. What are the extra respiratory functions of in-breath and out-breath? By modification in out-breath and in-breath, volume, velocity, density, deployment, flow, quantum, the quale and quanta, the quality of the breath and quantity of the breath. So we need to have this kind of field work carried out as to what the breath really can do in the extra respiratory realm. It has extra respiratory potentials. This must be first identified. It has extra respiratory activities. This must be first identified. then we must be trying to understand in greater details, clarity as to what are the usages of the breath, what are the applications of the breath, what are the activities of the breath, and how the breath can be used, activated, applied. So all these studies are required as a precursor to stepping towards pranayama. A wonderful academy for this is asana. This academy will tell you how the breath can function in the realm of yoga. Otherwise, you can see the usage of the breath in outside yogic realm. Embark upon hill climbing. Then you will know when you are doing mountaineering or hill climbing or climbing 10 stories, 20 stories, 15 stories, you know how the breath comes handy. It becomes a locomotive organ. When you are climbing up a hill, soon you will come to a stage where you start using your breath almost it is a locomotive organ assisting the legs, hauling and banking the legs, because the legs in mountaineering need a hauling force and need a banking force. I hope you understand what is hauling force and banking force. This terminology particularly comes in railways. When the railways are negotiating in the Ghat sections, there is a hauling engine and there is a banker engine. The hauling engine pulls and banker engine pushes, because the extra power is required for the train to negotiate a Ghat section, because it's climbing up and climbing down even. So even climbing down, the banker engine keeps the train pulled backwards and hauling engine keeps pulling the train backwards, because otherwise the train can just reel down by hauling. Because on a slope, when you are riding a vehicle, on a slope, your momentum gets added kind of booster, 2 times, 3 times, even 10 times. So you need a control. So you need to use the brakes when you are riding down the slope. So otherwise you will be just reeling down. So when the train is climbing down in Ghat section, there is a force needed. The banker engine comes to pull the train, and the front engine, which is hauling engine, keeps hauling the train so that it moves forward. So there are banking forces and hauling forces required when something is in motion, momentum. So the breath sometimes has to come as a banking force, sometimes as a hauling force. See, when you are climbing up the stairs, find out how the breath might be working. Or you are climbing up the hill, how the breath is working for you to climb up. Now while you are climbing down, you can easily reel down. That's why when you are climbing down, you slightly lean backwards. And there is a kind of pulling force so that you won't reel down. The breath also works like a force, which is the banker engine to pull back. And when you are climbing up, you need hauling forces. So you always climb with slightly leaning forward. You lean forward and climb up, and you slightly lean backwards when you climb down. If you lean forward, you will reel down. So the breath has such movements. So this needs to be identified. Now that's why I said the best, there you will learn how the breath works in extra yogic realm. Climbing up yoga, climbing up a hill or climbing up a 10, 15, 20 story building for physical feat is no yoga. So in extra yogic realm, they use the breath which works as a hauling force, banking force. It works as a propeller force and impeller force. But that is not going to come handy. Any study there is not going to come handy in yogic pursuit. If you know how to climb up the hill skillfully and how to climb down the hill skillfully with effort management, that is not going to contribute to your yoga. However, yoga will contribute there, but that will not contribute to your yoga. So in yoga, we need to identify this, how the breath works, and not go for a physical feat where the breath works in an exalted way. And the best academy to learn about breath usages or identify the breath potentials, breath activities, breath usages, breath applications is asanas. Therefore, if you recall, I said at least devote 10, 15, 20% of your asanic practice in each asana. At least see that 5-10% is devoted for breath studies. Studies in the realm of breath, breathing processes, breathing acts, breathing functions, breathing processes. The breath as benefactor, breath as beneficiary. Because it implies in asanas that you must make your breath beneficiary as well. And not just keep it all the time benefactor and exploit. That will be exploitation. In mercantile, it's like going for shopping and then going to all counters in a shopping mall and filling up your trolley and then refusing to go to payment counter. You need to pay when you have bought so many things. When your trolley is full of things, you need to come to payment counter and pay correspondingly. You can't just make the breath as benefactor and just use it. Do you like you being used? Do you like you being taken for granted? You don't like you being used. So in yoga, we have to see that we do not just use the breath, which is utter selfishness. We must pay back the breath. We must pay back the due to the breath by making the breath as beneficiary. So in every asana, it is important, it is implied that you start having this approach. Let me make my breath and breathing a beneficiary rather than through and through a benefactor and use it and exploit it. It can be very easily exploited basically because it is very conscientious force. It's a very conscientious agency. It can be easily used. And therefore, it's an implied lesson in your asanas that you must also pay attention to the breath being made beneficiary of body, which gets benefits through breath, then beneficiary of mind, which also gets benefits through the breath. In asanic endeavor, your mind too gets benefit for will, volition, resoluteness, activity, to respite, to relaxation, to quietude. The mind is in a great way beneficiary. A dull mind is activated. Overactive mind is regulated. The mind is also given any respite that is needed or any conditioner that is needed. Mind is quietened. That's the benefit of the mind. So quietude, tranquility, neutrality, virginity, purity, piety, sanctity, sanity, equity, equanimity must all come to mind in an asana. So the mind becomes a beneficiary. As such, the mind must also specifically become benefactor to the breath. It must contribute correspondingly to the breath. So that will be justifiable mercantile within us. The give and take between body, mind and breath to each other, for each other, there must be balance. So in asanas we have to learn how not only take benefit from the breath, but how to give benefit to breath. So in all the asanas, you must have this aspect definitely carried out. Therefore, now for an instance, let's try to understand how the breath can be used. And therefore, there is something called, as in asanas, you first want to exercise your body. Is that right? You want to exercise various body parts, body organs, body limbs. You want to exercise them. Not just activate, but exercise them. There are certain things which are called as pranayamic exercises, which will give some literacy to you in understanding how the breath can be used, how the breath is used, may be used, can be used, more prudently used with greater acumen, justifiably used, and then that will help you identify potentials of the breath and how to even address the breath. You will learn in asanas how to address the breath and how getting addressed by the breath. So therefore, these are certain exercises to conceive the various processes, understand and conceive the processes. So for example, settle down to Supta Virasana or Supta Baddha Konasana. If the Virasana is a problem, then you can go to Supta Baddha Konasana. So settle down in your position with a bolster under your back. Now, here we will be understanding how the breath as an agency can work in Baddha Konasana or Supta Virasana. Now let's try to understand how the exhalations can work for belly region. So let us exhale profoundly. Let us exhale profoundly in normal velocity pattern, at times with hypernormal velocity pattern, at times with lower velocity pattern. So you will learn different strokes by changing the velocity in these three grades: normal velocity range, hyponormal velocity range, and hypernormal velocity range. A deeper breath in normal velocity, and then slower and slower and slower and slower, each degree of it, and profound. Then thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker in each degree of it, and profound. Then you will see how it can work on abdominal organs, from gallbladder to urinary bladder. That too with Uddiyanic mannerisms when you exhale. So learn the strokes of your out breath. Exhale in stages, inhale in stages. Little sharper, heavy duty kind of exhalation, heavy duty kind of inhalation, which implies higher velocity. So it should be a kind of pneumatic exhalation. Pneumatic machines have enormous power, you know that. So the exhalation will have enormous power to activate all the entire organic complex from gallbladder to urinary bladder. So there are enormous processes, exhalatively and then inhalatively. They will be working differently. How they work in exhalation, how they work in inhalation, this should be matter of study for a student as a preparatory to pranayam. This is a preparatory exercise. Then if you start going for normal velocity but deeper, it has different functions. It has different functions for organs, from gallbladder at the top to urinary bladder at the bottom. It will have different kinds of actions, functions by velocity being dropped. So velocity is a major activity agency. The whole range of velocity you will be able to carry out a spectrum of activity, enormous spectrum of activity for gallbladder at the top of the belly to urinary bladder at the bottom of the belly. So it has certain functions for those organs, particularly with Uddiyanic mannerisms in your breath. Then post-exhalative retention and Uddiyana mudra. Again, you will address these organs differently, uniquely, by post-exhalative retention. And then inhalative process. So learn the different strokes of in-breath and out-breath. Then there are, in pranayamic breathing, there are configurations to the breath. It's not just volume, velocity. As the modern science tries to admeasure the breath in terms of volume. and perhaps velocity. They do not know the third dimension of breath. There are configurations of the breath. You can be breathing in graphic modes such as columnar breathing, cylindrical breathing, obverse conical, reverse conical, alternated obverse conical, then crescent moon in breath and out breath, semicircular kind of breath, saucer breath. So there are so many basic aerodynamics of breath and breathing. Each change in aerodynamics will change the function, act of the breath. And that's why it has to be attempted. As to how it can work on the organs. See, it can similarly work in thoracic region, as if you are plowing the thoracic region, combing the thoracic region. So you can be carrying out this act of plowing, scraping, combing, drilling, excavating, if I may say so, endocavating. This word is not there in technology. But what is excavation? Exactly opposite of is endocavation. You excavate the ground. You excavate the surface of the ground. That is called excavation. And what is endocavation? What happens in a volcano? In volcano, the surface of the land, what is called as a mantle, is loosened, opened out from inner side to crust side. That is endocavation. It is opposite of excavation. So the breath can be endocavating, the breath can be excavating. So excavating breath and endocavating breath. So these are various aspects of dynamics in breath and breathing. So with which we must become familiar. So we need to carry out some field work in various asanas, Shavasana, Swastikasana, Shavasana, or Baddha Konasana, Suptavirasana, in various supine positions. So that will be a breathing exercise. And there will be already a precursor to this in various asanas that you do. Standing poses, as I said during the last session, standing poses, supine poses, prone poses, forward bending poses, backward bending poses, lateral bending poses, lateral rotation poses, inverted poses, supine poses, prone poses. There are so many classes of postures you can identify. And in each asana, you must really make the breath as a significant benefactor and significant beneficiary. So you will know the different functions of the breath, as I said yesterday, last session, between Adhomukha Virasana to Supta Virasana. Bending forward in Virasana and bending backwards in Virasana. So there are diametrically opposite functions carried out. Breath can carry out diametrically opposite functions. So this is the precursor to pranayamic exercise. That in various asanas, you will carry out breath studies, breath observations, breath experimentation, breath usages, breath applications. This is so important. And then we will be able to understand that the breath has enormous potentials to work for our body organs and mind organs. Body matters and mind matters. Body aspects, factors and facets, and mind aspects, facets and factors. This goes undiscovered. This has gone undiscovered except in the realm of yoga. So yoga is a great shastra. It's an embodiment technology. And therefore, in yogi asanic process, you will be having enormous scope to carry out these studies. It's enormous academy to carry out these studies. It is enormous observatory to carry out observations. It is enormous laboratory to carry out experimentations. So these pranayamic exercises must be attempted, which are inscriptive breaths, inscriptive inhalations, inscriptive exhalations. So they are very, very conspicuous. They carry out very conspicuous functions. When the breath becomes subtler and subtler and subtler and subtler, there won't be such a conspicuity. neither will there be ambiguity. So not having conspicuity doesn't necessarily mean that there is only ambiguity here. So there is a different terminology, conspicuity in the realm of breath and breathing. It will carry out fine acts, superfine acts, delicate acts, tender acts, waft acts. So it is not carrying out conspicuous activity, it will carry out waft activities, delicate activities, tender activities, sublime activities, sober activities. So we will be able to explore the potentials of very sober breath on one hand to very pneumatic breath on the other side, heavy duty breath on the other side. So heavy duty breath to feather touch breath, we will be able to identify its potentials. We will be able to identify its usages. How heavy duty breath is used and how a feather touch breath is used. How to give benefit to heavy duty breath and how to give benefit to feather touch breath. So our body matter will learn those knacks, tricks, skills to be benefactor of very rarefied breath. So therefore there is enormous scope, and this study is important for pranayama. Because the basic principle is that if you do not know a usage of a gadget, function of a gadget, purpose of a gadget, how are you going to regulate it? It won't be regulation. So this is so important, this is implied. When you are going to regulate something, you must be aware of, you must have sufficient literacy about potentials, usages, applications, functions, purpose, act of that agency. Then only you will be able to regulate it. So that's one thing. Now I will just introduce you another fascinating aspect in the education about pranayama. See, this word regulation is there. This word, we know pranayama is breath regulation, breath control. Now these words, control or regulation, have three dimensions. Some words are unidimensional, some words are two-dimensional, some words are three-dimensional. The words such as man, woman, single dimension. That this is a man, this is a woman, single dimension. But when we say this is a father and this is a mother, it becomes three-dimensional. That means they have a spouse and they have a child, offspring. When we say this is husband, this is wife, it is two-dimensional. Because the wife can be only wife when she has husband, and husband can only be husband when he has a wife. So man, woman, single dimensional, unidimensional. Husband and wife, two-dimensional. But father and mother, three-dimensional. Son and daughter, three-dimensional. Because if they are son, if there is someone, a man as a son and woman as a daughter, they must have parents. They cannot be not having father and mother at all. Never ever. It's not possible. Never ever they had a father and mother. So these are son and daughter are three-dimensional. Multi-dimensional are there, like daughter-in-law, son-in-law. That means it implies that they have got married. Then they have got even father-in-laws and mother-in-laws. Then only they are son-in-laws and daughter-in-laws. So the word regulation is three-dimensional. Control, the word is three-dimensional. So this is the pedantic approach to understand these terms, words here. Dictionary will never tell you that there are three dimensions to word control and three dimensions to word regulation. However, here it is there. What are the three dimensions? Breath regulation, that means there is regulator and there is regulated. If there is no regulator and no regulated, there can be no regulating. So when we use the word breath regulation to pranayam, we must know that there is regulator and there is regulating. So we must know the caliber, potentials, function, role, act of regulator, qualifications, the capacities, the credentials. You can't be a regulator without proper regulator, without credentials, without qualifications, without machinery. So the regulator needs machinery to regulate. Regulator should have qualification. Regulator should have credentials. The regulated similarly has a profile. So what is regulated entity? What are the profiles and facets of regulated? What are the facets of regulator? And therefore, and what are the facets of regulating? So these words need to be again churned out in our thought process to arrive at proper suitable meanings here. See, a policeman, for example, is a regulator. How is a policeman regulating? He can only regulate, he can be regulating with his uniform on body, with certain instruments that he has in his body, a stick, etc., a whistle, etc. He cannot be having no uniform. He cannot be having no such symbolic things with him which have a function, such as a stick, or such as a pistol, such as a whistle. He can't be carrying in his hand a peacock feather and say, I am a policeman. A bird feather and say, I am a policeman. Because that's the machinery. He needs to have some machinery to be regulating as policeman. Now, a policeman will be regulating differently. Imagine, a policeman is called for a youth festival in a university campus, where 10,000 students are going to assemble. How is the police force there when 10,000 youth are going to come together? Now, same policeman is coming to a gathering of 10,000 children below the age of 8. How is the policeman? What is the machinery? He doesn't have that kind of voice, typical voice, commanding voice, martial voice. He doesn't move the stick like he would be moving the stick in a crowd of 10,000 youth, 25,000 youth. The children are to be regulated differently. So he will be little fatherly. He will cajole the child, convince the child, handle the child in a tender way. He doesn't handle the youth in a university campus tenderly. He will give a spank on the buttocks or the back or even on the face perhaps. He doesn't do that, regulating for children. The last example I will give you to end this session. In Pandharpur, there is a huge gathering of 10 lakhs of people, 1 million people. The policemen are there in the temple shrine. How are the policemen there? They know that all those who have gathered here are not unruly people. They are devotees of Vithala, Panduranga. And therefore, he has a different machinery to be moving in these Warkaris who are in Pandharpur. So he is sober. He doesn't have to yell at them because they are Warkaris. They have come with emotional tone in their mind. So as such, he doesn't have to be regulating them with a harsh voice, martial tone in voice. So he regulates differently the Warkaris in Pandharpur. Then some gathering, mob, the mob collecting on streets. He will use tear gas, etc., etc. He will be quite martial in nature. So his machinery, regulation is totally different. Regulating in Pandharpur shrine, regulating on assembly in a place of assemblage, such as it can be a ground, it can be a square, it can be road, it can be streets. He regulates differently. So regulating, multifaceted. Regulator, multifaceted depending upon what is regulated, why it is regulated, when it is regulated. How the father, the parent or father or mother will regulate the child which is unwell. It is one way to regulate the child. How the parents will regulate the child which is perfectly well and as a matter of fact very, very naughty. In a exuberance of energy, kinetism, the child is moving everything, moving that way. How will the parent regulate? As against the same child when the child is unwell. So regulation is different. Because regulated entity is either in unwell state or exuberant state of health. So regulator, regulated, regulating are multifaceted acts. Basically, this is a three-dimensional term. Ponder over this. Don't just say breath is regulation, pranayama is breath regulation. What is the profile, function, role of regulator? And then the regulated as well. What is regulated? Breath is regulated. What is regulating? Is it proper? With proper machinery, proper credentials, proper processes? What's the profile of the regulator? So we need to consider regulator and regulated even when the breath is, pranayama is breath regulation. So I've given some matter for you to ponder over. The very proposition that pranayama is breath regulation is not so simple by taking literal meaning of the word regulation. Ponder over this for some time. That should be enough for the day. Thank you very much. Namaskar.